Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. Okay, good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Blueprints. Can we get you to introduce yourself to the audience first?
Hi, I'm James Campbell. I'm a high school teacher in Toronto, a member of the Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, involved in the OTPP Divest campaign and a bunch of other things, but here primarily to speak about the OTPP Divest work.
Hey, Jessa. Hey, James. I do some organizing in West Toronto through my Palestine Solidarity group, through a parent group, through my union, and so on. And I'm here as part of the Stop the DSRB campaign, which is sort of a coalition of they happen to be local Toronto groups who are opposing this DSRB war bank.
The war bank, I think that best describes it. Acronyms are my downfall. So we will get into exactly what that is and what it has to do with divesting from pension plans. Trust me, it's connected very closely. And that's why these two folks are working together. This is the act of divesting from pension plans from war specifically. We know climate justice activists do a lot of divestment work as well, but let's be a little bit more specific. In terms of the OTPP here in Ontario, who all is working to divest that massive pension plan from weapons?
So the OTPP Divest campaign emerged in the winter of 2023, a bunch of teachers just absolutely horrified about what was going on with the genocide in Gaza and trying to figure out how to be addressing this in our schools, how to support Palestinian students and their families, trying to figure out a way to take on our role as educators, as caregivers of children, to find a space to speak and talk about this, and just confronting all sorts of the profound anti-Palestinian racism, cultures of silence in our schools about addressing this. Just started meeting almost on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, just trying to support each other and figure out what work we could be doing around this. Teachers who have been organizing for years around a whole bunch of issues. And out of that, we created a group called Educators for Palestine. A bunch of us had been involved years ago with Teachers for Palestine. And then from that group, a smaller sort of subcommittee developed around focusing on the pension plan, and focusing on the pension plan precisely because, and you did a great episode on this maybe almost a year ago, because it was so many teachers were finding it absolutely impossible to speak and talk about this in our schools. There was such a culture of repression, colleagues getting targeted for even saying the word Palestine, right? So there was a real feeling of focusing on our pension plan. This is a way for us to break the silence about the genocide, break the silence about the war crimes being committed in our names, that this could be a way to start having this conversation. So we just emerged as almost a subcommittee of Educators for Palestine, focusing on the pension as a place to do education among members, as well as trying to heed the call of the General Union of Palestinian Teachers from October 2023 of asking us to do everything we can to restrict and the transfer of arms to Israel, and that includes divestment. And I can get into more about how the campaign has sort of evolved from there, but it emerged from just a group of teachers deeply concerned about what was going on in the world and therefore in our classrooms and with our students.
2023, we're 3 years in almost. What's the response been like from teachers finding out how their pension plan is invested? Because that's tough, right? Like, They need their pension plans. They want their pension plans to do well. Lord knows weapons make money, right? But they've also witnessed what, at least some of them have been witnessing, what we've seen. And generally, weapons manufacturing, they're not too hard to cast as villains, right? Some folks will offer, Carney is pushing, and as we'll talk about the war bank, he is pushing that industry as the answer to absolutely everything. But generally, anti-war divestment campaigns have resonated with people. Have you found that's the case with teachers in Ontario?
100%. I mean, we can get into this later, but the structure of our plan is pretty inside baseball. So teachers, our unions have fought for years to ensure that we have this incredible pension, and I think teachers are quite rightly proud of it and see this as a key part of our deferred salary. This is what is part of the work of our union and of our labor movement to create this for education workers, for teachers in particular. And yet when we find out that our pension plan is using our name to invest in companies that build products that literally murder teachers and destroy schools, it is hard. And so in so many ways, once teachers find out about it, it's been very easy to get teachers on board. There's of course resistance. Our unions are big tent organizations, and there's a lot of different politics within them. But once we've got motions to the floor, they pass with huge majorities. So once local unions in both our provincial unions, the motion to divest from weapons manufacturers and impose a screen on all future investments in war is a pretty no-brainer for the vast majority of teachers. We know that all wars are essentially wars against children, wars against civilians, and teachers just know that's a fundamentally not in line with what our profession is fundamentally about, which is about care and well-being of kids and trying to create more fair futures for those kids. So it really does resonate once teachers find out. It's such a obvious abuse of our name and our reputation to be investing in war. The contradiction is evident to everybody.
It's hard to untangle as well, right? You don't always know where the investments are going. Is this a transparent pension plan? I know like the university pension plan, there's a piece in the Maple that will link. They're doing some work around the students and the workers of post-secondary, their pension plans there. Sometimes getting the institutions to disclose the divestments is half the battle. How is it with the OTPP?
Similar, and it can be a slippery fish. So we've got the plan does publicly list all its investments over $250 million. So on the website, they list major investments. Overall, it's about a $300 billion plan. So it's huge. And then we know about other investments, at least in publicly listed American companies, through going through the Securities and Exchange Commission filings every quarter. And yet those can be challenging because in one quarter the plan might be invested in something and then another quarter they might, and they use the time lag very effectively. So when we show up at our annual meetings and sometimes name specific companies that we know the plan has been invested in, we will hear some answers along the lines of, well, we're invested in a lot of different companies and those filings are only a momentary glimpse of any company that we're invested in at any time. So there is a certain level of transparency, and yet it's not entirely transparent. And so, for example, we know the plan has some investments in Israel, but only because they told us when we were able to get a meeting with them. But those are not publicly listed. Those are not available. And so most of our information is based on those, the research of Just Peace Advocates. There's been all sorts of the climate campaign that's being run by Shift Action has been amazing in terms of their research and getting information about the climate, dangerous climate investments of the plan. So we're often using research of others, but it's not always transparent.
I love to hear that you're able to lean on others' research. I mean, if someone is going through all of the investments and they find anything, send it our way. We've done a million episodes on how these movements are actually interconnected as well. But it's gaining traction right across Canada, right? There's moves to divest from really big pension plans, like $300 billion, the politics that must surround this $300 billion must be intense. Where is the resistance if teachers are on board and it seems like a no-brainer, right? Where is the resistance coming from then to clean up these pension plans?
It's a great question. So the resistance, unsurprisingly, is from the plan itself. Essentially, these plans have been set up. Tom Fraser and Kevin Scarrett have done some really interesting research about this. In the 90s, the plans were set up specifically, essentially, to take this huge bucket of money that was essentially from a bunch of public sector workers and make it available to financial capitalism. So these are huge buckets of money that don't necessarily rely on the amount that they take off my paycheck every month to fund it. So they actually don't need teachers' monthly contributions to fund the plan. It's a huge bucket of money. And so the resistance comes from the plan itself of saying, look, we think, we've heard this many times from the stage, both on climate and on war. We think there is money to be made in war. We think there is money to be made in climate destruction. And so
we will
continue. They're not wrong. We will continue to invest in it because we see there being profit to be made there. So, I mean, it's almost quite literally the main enemy is capitalism and finance capitalism itself. But thus the core contradiction here of, workers have worked hard to make this pension plan possible for us. Workers work hard throughout their career, and we all deserve, every worker deserves a healthy wage in retirement, right? This is a fundamental social benefit that everyone deserves. And yet there's this core contradiction of once we give this up to the market is going to do what it wants, or at least try to do what it wants.
I know the enemy is capitalism, but someone got up on a stage and who is articulating this on behalf of the plan? The plan is... Here we can name some names. No, is there a board? Is it not created of teachers? Can you explain to the listener who is managing this plan and has the gall to say, I don't care really what it's invested in. It's making us money. That sounds like Mr. Burns.
And this is all... I'll try and keep it quick, and then there's a lovely segue to Tyler to talk about war bank pieces. So essentially the plan was set up. There's two main sponsors. There's the Ontario Teachers Federation, which is made up of all the major teachers unions. We appoint half of the board members through the Ontario Teachers Federation. And then there's the Government of Ontario, which appoints the other 4 board members. And then there's a chair of the board. So that's at the board level. And then we've got the pension executive itself. The board hires the pension executive. And so all of this has been set up so, as they've told us, so that plan investment decisions cannot be influenced by politics. And yet we have a CEO named Joe Taylor who has heard loud and clear from the labor side of the plan sponsors that we don't want to be invested in war. We don't want to be invested in war crimes. We don't want to be invested in products that are used to murder children and teachers and involved in what the UN has called the scholasticide, or the bombing of the school in Iran. That's not in our best interests, if that's what we're saying fiduciary duty is. And Joe Taylor, the CEO of Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, has heard that loud and clear. He's known it for 3 years. He's gotten hundreds of letters about this. He knows it loud and clear. And yet, from the stage at this year's pension plan, we heard him say explicitly that the plan is committed to investing in defense because, and I'm quoting him here, we've been asked to do it by our governments to help them build national security and the defense of Canada. So there's this, we're being told on one hand, no, we have to be independent. We can't be influenced by any of the plan sponsors. And yet here he is saying the government wants us to be invested in war. And so we're going to invest in war. And after hearing for 2 years directly from teachers, having, the two largest teachers unions in the province, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, both voting overwhelmingly and writing to the plan formally, officially, please divest from any weapons manufacturers and please impose a screen on any future investments in weapons. He's heard that loud and clear. He then comes out, and this is a handoff to Taylor, as a public booster of this war bank and saying that he is very excited to be a public face and using his name and using the name of Ontario teachers as a sponsor of the war bank. The Ontario Teachers Pension Plan is literally called Ontario Teachers in the finance world. It's known as Teachers. So it's kind of galling for him to have heard loud and clear from Ontario teachers and then turn around and use our name to say, we want to create this very shady, shadowy, non-transparent bank, which is essentially going to go to the weapons industry. And Tyler, I'll hand it off to you to hear more about this war bank.
I think I can pick up both of that handoff from James and then the question from Jessa about where the resistance is to this. Of course, finance capital on one level, because one thing that's remarkable, and this is sort of like the motivating problem that the war bank takes itself to have, its directors and founders, is that there is more of a reticence these days, and they will quite explicitly say this, that people are less comfortable having their money, whether it's just in their savings account or whether it's in their pension plan, going to climate catastrophe, pipelines, private prisons, and weapons. And the interesting thing is, and they're like remarkably transparent, they're remarkably frank in their conversations with one another, even in the literature they put out, that this like huge, to them, the impediment is ESG. And James will have much more to say about this, which is like environmental, social, governance regulations, which I guess is this recent requirement that has like maybe 5-10 years at most, has become a problem for them. And they blame this for declining investment in the weapons industry. They will sometimes, this is so crass, they will sometimes say the two problems are ESG and DEI. So like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and these other regulations. So anything getting in the way of capital, these impediments. So they really are just like acting out the forces, the deeper forces.
So they openly acknowledge the huge drive, right, to fund the important things like healthcare and education and the infrastructure that we actually use. I don't mean weapons facilities, and they're like, I know you're feeling a lot of pressure from your population to do the right thing. We're here to help you make sure you can keep those dollars in defense spending. Did I paraphrase that pretty well?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, on the one hand, they've got like the activists, the people who are actually, using the ESG regulations that have been taken on. And on the other hand, they acknowledge that the population much more widely for some reason, has this concern about housing, social spending, and so on. And it's going to be tough to wrench the money away from them at this point, they say. And they will just explicitly say this. Like the Atlantic Council released this report where they will, I have a quote somewhere where, they will just actually talk about groceries being this concern that the population has. James.
Can I read it out? The quote, I mean, it's just, so this is, it's been the idea of it has been around forever. So originally in internal circles, it was called the NATO Bank. So it emerges out of NATO, emerges from the Atlantic Council. This is the document. It's in like the opening page of the Atlantic Council. It says this issue, which was the inability of national governments to spend more on military, largely stems from political rather than economic factors. Despite Russia's invasion of Ukraine and rising geopolitical tensions with China, the public in many European nations and Canada prioritize spending on healthcare, education, and public infrastructure over defense. The report posits that expecting a drastic shift in these domestic spending priorities remains unlikely. They are explicit about needing to create this bank to get around democracy and get around the impulse of people to say, look, we want our government spending money on preserving and promoting life, not destroying it.
Is a lot of this under the premise that the fucking weapons industry is short on cash? Like I'm reading some of the literature around the war bank, and it's like, oh, they're small and medium size. Is this mom and pop shit that they're trying to, there's mom and pop weapons manufacturers that just can't get off the ground, and we're here to stimulate that economy. They have lost their minds trying to frame it like this. I cannot believe that would get any traction with people. I don't think anybody thinks of that industry as not being already immensely profitable. And we know capital is insatiable, but it's not a struggling industry. Right? There's other motivations there, right? Like, why are we beefing up our defense and military spending? This goes beyond the kind of capital question. But Tyler, how do you end up starting to work with the same folks that are divesting from pensions? Did you feel like you had to bring the bank in, this issue of the war bank into it?
Well, so we have sort of a little bit of a ragtag team here of local activists who've been working on this, researching it, in some sense hoping some academic would show up who would just do the thing for us. Did not happen. So we've sort of bootstrapped our little organization, and then we had World Beyond War National sort of come in and do some of that for us. And so I think in the process, yes, thank you, Rachel. So in the process of sort of having conversations, really hoping that some savior would come in, I think we'd had enough conversations, and I think James and the OTPP divest people sort of independently landed on the war bank, this DSRB, being a problem. For one thing, because Joe Taylor is just an explicit backer of it. One of two pension plan presidents who are just revealing the grift. Maybe I'm not sure how they thought they could get away with this, but it's Joe Taylor and then the head of OMERS are backing that Toronto should be the headquarters of this global war bank, where the global headquarters would be here in Toronto. And the thing that they pointed to is, look at all of this pension money. James can maybe correct me on this as well. I think it's $2.3 trillion of public pension money is here in Toronto, this huge pot of money. And the way that they're trying to entice European nations, Indo-Pacific nations, which seems to be South Korea, Australia, Japan at the very least, to locate themselves here is in significant part because of this big pot of pension money, which is a world, one of the world's biggest sort of pots of that sort of finance capital. And so Toronto is relevant. Pension plans are relevant. The Atlantic Council themselves will also say, not only are commercial banks becoming reticent because of this ESG problem to invest in weapons, but so are pension plans. And it's because of people like James and his group who are actively trying to divest and certainly resist any further divestment. So there's an obvious sort of pension plans sort of fall out of this quite naturally. And are actually also, this is important, a point of resistance against the bank. Because if we can have enough pension plans, raise enough of a racket, promise enough of a fight. The big 8 pension plans in Toronto, for example, public pension plans, if they can promise that they're going to raise a fight, if the war bank actually ends up here, that might make the worldwide directors say, wait, Toronto's maybe not the place for us. Taking Toronto off their map as a potential location is significant because, to your more general point, Carney is backing this bank hard. He may be, in fact, like the biggest backer of this bank in the world right now. At one point, I think there was a lot more appetite from many different countries, but I think European countries have founded their own little coalitions to have their smaller scale banks. Geographically, Canada is a little bit more isolated. And so Carney is really the one left flying himself out to Luxembourg to try to have these conversations, seemingly try to keep other countries on board. So there's all this motivation anywhere here in Toronto, here in Canada, to really land hard blows against the bank worldwide.
That really sucks, though, that they're able to point to these investments that for 3 years you've been trying to remove as proof that there's even appetite for weapons investment, not just a lot of pension plan money here. But look, these teachers, they love investing in weapons, right? Look at how much money we have invested in weapons. They're looking at the dollars and not listening to the voices that are coming out of, these conventions and all these AGMs that are making these declarations.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the first part of that, I mean, the connection is very much through the incredible work of World Beyond War, who from the beginning, have been supporting the teachers' divestment campaign. We're all full-time classroom teachers. Some of us are retired, but everyone is busy, and the work of World Beyond War Canada and in terms of supporting our work for the past 2 years, and then through that, raising the issue of and connecting us to the issue of the war bank has been a really key vector and supporter, including labor against the arms trade and labor for Palestine. So everyone trying to work on all of these different things all at the same time. It's been incredibly inspiring, really in moments where it's hard to find beauty. It's felt like quite beautiful solidarity of everyone sharing information, supporting each other's work, trying to lift each other's work up. And back to the point about the reputation, they're called the Maple 8, the sort of Canadian public pension, and they trade on that reputation of sort of Canada being this nice, responsible country. And we have a competent leader like Mark Carney. We don't have the irresponsible, erratic Donald Trump, right? It really is trying to frame this as, hey, we're the good, stable, responsible actors here, invest here, when the reality is this is all invested in the highest crimes in the world, right? The genocide, wars of aggression, the most financially irresponsible in so many ways decisions to invest in war and destruction and annihilation, or annihilation through fossil fuel investment. That's what the Maple 8 are heavily invested in. And what's interesting for us is that when we were able to get a meeting with the plan early in our campaign, they were explicit with us that their reputational concerns are central to many of their investment decisions. They were explicit about, look, we may or may not be interested in abiding by international law. We may or may not be interested in, even though we've signed on to the Principles for Responsible Investment for the UN that says fiduciary duty can't just be maximizing quarterly profits for your trustees. It has to be investing in their best interests, which includes following international law. That to violate that opens you up to all sorts of risks. They've told us that a real significant investment consideration is reputational damage, and that while they tend not to like to use the word divestment, they will divest from something that they use the phrase severe controversies. So about 20 years ago, no, not 20 years ago, 2018. So 10 years ago, the plan divested from tobacco, very proudly divested from tobacco. And not incidental to that was this, Rick Mercer rant that he did about how crazy it was that Ontario teachers were making money from this harmful product like tobacco. And so this idea of trying to remove the social license to operate became very clear to us as an essential way to apply pressure on these organizations that are not open to democratic control, right? Like we can't, even though our members have voted to divest from war and war crimes, that vote is meaningless to a $300 billion pension plan. And yet the way they are pressurable and movable is this branding that they have of being thoughtful, responsible investors is central to their ability to operate. And so just one of the key strategies of our campaign is to try and burst that bubble and trying to name explicitly that these are some of the most dangerous, life-threatening investments on the planet, and that to be invested in them is as irresponsible as it gets. And when these organizations are explicit, right? It's in the Atlantic Council memo. People want to invest in healthcare and infrastructure, right? And they're saying we need a way to get around that because there's so much money for us to be made here. And so the hope is, I only heard about this, within the last 6 months. But it's been an idea that's been around for a long time. And so back to Tyler's point of trying to get the word out about what this is, and trying to force a conversation about this is going to be central to trying to stop it.
Yeah. So if I can just jump in, I don't want to get too into the weeds of what the DSRB is doing to sort of try to brand itself, to try to entice that money back into the weapons industry, but even to accelerate the flow like never before, in line with Carney's goals of this 5% GDP towards NATO spending. But they make it pretty clear that they're sort of they are going to directly try to take the reputational harm of investing in weapons out of investing in weapons. So exactly to James's point, they're completely sensitive to these exact same topics as the DSRB. And so their salve, their way of addressing it is going to be the same way Carney has been doing it. This is about national sovereignty. This is about national security. This is about independence. A little bit of a bait and switch. They're going to allude to the U.S., even though the U.S. is going to be directly involved in the bank. So this is clearly not going to be a significant amount of independence. So, but the OMER's president, in a particularly vile quote that he gave to the Ford government, talks about Western democracy. This is a win-win for Western democracy and investor profits, is the DSRB. So the point here is that the reputation here is because, Jesse, you alluded to earlier, there is a stigma in arms dealing, obviously, right? This is not something that anyone wants to put their good name.
But at least it used to be, right? Carney's trying to change all that.
But if you can rebrand it in these other ways, so it's not like I'm just meeting on an airport runway with someone with a bunch of cargo boxes. No, in fact, this is going to this very specific campaign that is going to be rearming NATO and allied countries and other G7 countries, really tightly binding it to this particular campaign of democracy, the West, the EU, G7, and so on, and the sovereignty that we need against some unnamed actor, which can't be the US. And then the second point is to take the financial risk out of this as well by actually having our governments underwrite the financial risk of investing in weapons. Because once you have these particularly ornate, complicated machines of war, like an F-16 or an F-35, that require all of these different little components, supply chains that are across many different countries, it's actually a serious financial risk to invest in. You're going to have some little bit of optic technology because you require all of these other things to sort of like also arrive on the tarmac for this plane.
A logistical nightmare.
Exactly. It's a logistical nightmare. And it's a financial one too, because things can go wrong in that supply chain and then all of a sudden you're out of luck. And so all of the member governments here are going to put forward public money, massive amounts of public money, in order to underwrite those investments. So insofar as there are losses, that is going to be eaten by the public. They are quite explicit about this, that there are going to be risk guarantees against losses so that these more complicated machines of war are not as much of a financial risk. So reputational risk and financial risk, they've diagnosed these as the two concerns that pension plans and commercial banks have. So they're directly going to try to take the bite out of them.
And these are the two paths that we take, right? We try to interrupt the finances and some of us, the supply chain, right? That we saw this with pipelines, right? The government was like, oh, look, everyone's shutting down these pipelines. It's getting longer to build. Oh, land claims. We'll buy the pipeline. We'll don't worry. No one's going to take any losses on this. Come invest your money here. If you read the budget, like Carney's budget, if you read the awful texts that comes with it, this is his plan. Right? He campaigned on this. And the scary part is all the parties actually campaigned on this to a degree where they feel like if we just made the weapons here in Canada for Canadian workers, then that would be the solution to buying jets from the United States. Like there was a real objection to boosting Canadian businesses. And that's how Carney's framing this. Like, even though the components will come from everywhere and war profiteers will profit right across the globe, to your average Canadian, they are hearing that this is going to create jobs. This is going to stimulate the economy. And on top of it all, the bonus is it will keep us safe. And you have progressives eating this up to a degree, right? Even though they've witnessed war and they have all the reasons why they would hate war profiteering, they also see Trump as a threat. And, they're falling into some of the pitfalls that they were meant to fall in. So do you find you've got to navigate that as well, right across the political spectrum?
Absolutely. I mean, I think important, correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, Olivia Chow was there at the public announcement of the bid to have the war bank in Toronto. So right, they're on stage with Ford and Joe Taylor, right? This is they have a big tent coalition as well. For war. So we often have, it came up at the last pension meeting and it comes up often in conversations. We will hear from members and from folks in our pension leadership saying, well, of course we don't want to be invested in war crimes and genocide. Of course we don't want that, but surely it's okay to be invested in weapons in general. We don't have a problem with the whole category, do we? And so there is that leap that is sometimes hard for many people to say all war is a war crime. There is no such thing as a war that doesn't involve the murder of children and civilians. They are hundreds of years of war has shown us that always it's kids who are victims of war, and so that is a big jump. And yet I take great hope from the fact that when presented with the motion of, hey, do you want to be invested in weapons industry? The vast majority of teachers say absolutely not. I mean, these are, and even politically, these are 60-70% of Canadians, very clearly against this illegal attack on Iran and Lebanon, right? So these are, I think, increasingly in this moment, The mask is off in many ways about what it means to be invested in the war industries. But it comes up. This is why, for me, you talked about not liking acronyms earlier, right? I think if we call it the Defense and Security Resilience Bank, well, let's name this for what it is. It's a war bank. It's a bank that is going to be primarily interested in funding war profiteering, right? And so I think even in our when Joe Taylor got up on the stage and spent a minute of his presentation talking about his interest in defense, there were teachers sort of unaffiliated with our group, just teachers who were at that meeting saying, this isn't defense. These are offensive weapons. That language opens up this whole idea of that we are just defending ourselves from some unnamed enemy.
Or others. Canada loves to defend others. If we get engaged, it's always as the benevolent saviors of some other peoples oppressed by a regime.
It's so interesting to hear like how quickly the Carney framing breaks down, or the framing of this as these are weapons because, of course, we need to defend ourselves. But James, you're suggesting it does not take a long time for people to note that perceptibly, that's not what a huge number of these weapons are in any way involved in. And I mean, the Carney government just voted down, with the No More Loopholes Act, an actual regulation that would have helped ensure what the end user actually might be, so that weapons don't actually end up just in anyone's hands. But to Jess's earlier point about this being across the political spectrum issue, yes, Mayor Chow, it was, there was this press conference in November to announce the DSRB bid to be in Toronto, and Chow was there with Premier Ford, with representatives from the Carney government, Julie Zarevitz and Karim Bardisi, and so they were all standing on the stage together. I would also note that, why am I forgetting her? Merritt Stiles is the Ontario. Merritt Stiles. So there is massive amount of defense manufacturing in Ontario, and she has quite clearly had a very difficult time of not giving explicit support of it. So when Rochelle in Brampton was found to be supplying armored vehicles used by ICE in Minneapolis, that, to my knowledge, is the only time she has stepped up and had any issue with Ontario weapons manufacturing. That same company has been supplying those same armored vehicles to, Israeli police in the West Bank, did not raise that as an issue. She has not raised an issue that another Ontario company is supplying armored vehicles to the UAE, who are using them in Sudan to commit horrifying genocide. So the only time her sort of political conscience was piqued was when it was ICE, when it was Minneapolis. Other than that,
when it was very popular and safe to do so.
Yes, exactly. When just all of the pieces were in place, and it was literally just within 2 days of I'm forgetting the person's name, but one of the people murdered by ICE.
Alex Preddy.
Sorry, yes, Alex Preddy. It was just sort of very, very clearly tied to that particular act. But other than that, she just does not have the will to engage with this issue at all, despite, of course, being an NDP.
I think a lot of, not to let her off the hook, I would never do that. But when you get involved with labor, then it gets a little tricky, right? Because some of them are labor shops that are making these weapons, and there is great rank and file movements to declare hot cargo, to get tools down in these shops, and we applaud those efforts. But we know that the leadership isn't 100% there. The CLC, Canadian Labour Congress, see, I'm using acronyms when I know I shouldn't do that. They are really weak sauce in terms of this issue and adopting a hot cargo kind of mentality. So, yes, this is where then the progressive politics get really kind of dirty. So I imagine you're focusing on the grassroots and building momentum. Let's shift into you had an action last week, and let's talk a little bit how that went, who came together for it, and where you're going from there.
This was the third annual meeting that we've had teachers show. We've been going to these for years, but the third annual meeting that we've shown up at and made a confrontation with the moral crimes of our investments impossible to ignore. We've stood up, asked the questions that needed to be asked, and disrupted the meeting to make sure that everyone in the room is aware of what's happening and can't be the three monkeys about it. So what does this mean for the campaign? We have been, I think, energized by the direct action that we've taken, and are trying to use that as sort of one of the pieces of using it to try and get the word out. This year, it was really exciting. We've had relationships with and done work with Toronto Palestinian families, Toronto Jewish families, World Beyond War, Labor for Palestine, a whole bunch of groups. We did a public vigil in February 2025 for all of the 20,000 murdered children in Gaza. We did it outside the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan head office. This year we had an outside demonstration. We had an inside action going on, and that felt very powerful to have both happening at the same time. And we got some very exciting information from the stage, which suggests that the campaign has had some significant impact. We are waiting to get some detailed confirmations, but we are hoping that in the coming weeks, we're going to have an exciting announcement to share. We need to get our ducks in the row on that and confirm a few things. And for us, the campaign goes on, and wanting to turn to using, from the beginning, the campaign has been focused not just on trying to get the plan to divest, but using the campaign as a chance to break the silence in our schools and in our unions about the genocide in Gaza, about apartheid and illegal occupation, about the American empire, the illegal invasion of Iran and Lebanon. For us, it's a way that we can break those silences and remind teachers that this isn't an abstraction. These are issues that for some of us might feel far away. For many of our students and their families, these are as close as it gets. And that we have skin in the game. We have some moral responsibilities here because we're directly profiting from these things. This is not an abstract piece. So the hope is that part of the campaign continues, that we use these outward-facing actions to then be able to come back and have these conversations within our workplaces and within our unions. We've done phone zaps. We've put out educational videos. Some of us have used those for doing lunch and learns within our workplaces. So that work will continue. And for us, the ultimate goal is divestment, and that will continue until everything is out. We've heard sometimes from the plan and from others saying, well, $300 billion, we've only got a tiny percentage invested in this company that's operating in the illegal settlements, Airbnb or bookings.com. We've only got a tiny little bit of money invested in, right, this top 3 weapons manufacturers. So don't worry, we don't have that much invested. For us, our unions have democratically said we don't want any investments in weapons, and this is an ethical bottom line. So for us, we keep pushing this forward, and the beauty of it is we have this. You asked about transparency earlier. There is this annual meeting every year where the plan directors have to get up and face members and answer some questions. And so that will continue to be an opportunity to bring public eyes and attention on trying to remove that social license of the plan, and also a chance to engage with our colleagues and other members.
I imagine there's just so many teachers out there that feel a bit stuck, a bit helpless. Maybe they're not tuned into like local pally groups. So they just feel like every day at work, they're really, what they can do about it is curtailed. And finding an avenue that is still organizing in the workplace, but maybe not radicalizing your students, where they found a medium where there absolutely is a lever of power to be pulling on there. And yeah, not a penny, not a dime, right? I'm sure there's a whole other chant that comes after that, but they don't understand like the end goal is ending an occupation. War across the planet is, but when we're talking about Palestine, and we still, even with all of that divested, would just then need to move on to another revenue source for the occupation, right? So it's like, no, we're not done here. The Giller folks organizing around Scotiabank and the Giller, they were great at that. They tried to be appeased with tens of millions of dollars at a time. We took X% out. Aren't you happy yet? And they're like, no, more, all of it. We are not relenting, and they were then successful in a lot of that, right? Giller cut ties, Scotiabank cut much of its Elbit investments. It works. It works, Tyler. What do you got up your sleeve moving forward? How are we going to up the pressure, especially around the World Bank? That, Carney's got a lot of sympathetic ears right now with the narratives that he's using to sell this, and he's got Ford lined up. You mentioned Chow. That doesn't surprise me. If it's bad because when I Googled it, like to learn more about it, all the banks have statements on how excited they are. Every defense magazine out there has a piece on it. They're salivating. So uphill battle. How are you going to stop it?
The levers of power that we have, James sort of alluded to the fact that the pension plan, how it's managed is not democratically governed in a certain way. And yet we've just seen with our legislators in Canada that that's a dead end anyways. At least, we're just simply not going to move them at this point in time because there's so much buy-in to the Carney vision of this. One of the Toronto ridings here just had a by-election last week and Carney still crushed it. So there's simply not that out there. But the mechanisms of pension plans, in terms of disruption, in terms of playing on the reputational damage that can be made in terms of the villains who are leading these plans, putting their faces on the placards, putting their quotes that they've made about the war bank on these placards, and both the OMERS president and the OTPP president have collaborated with the Ford government. With the OTPP, this is like a particular betrayal, where he works for fucking teachers and he's then showing up arm in arm with Ford to promote this war bank. So double betrayal there.
For folks listening, just Ford has gutted education here in Ontario. He's a conservative. No teacher should go anywhere near him. That's just the backstory that maybe continue, Tyler. If you know, you know.
Yeah, right. Fair. So 8 years of this Ford government of just constant attacks, not only in the education system, but teachers, just so much deliberate attacks on the character of teachers. And so putting these, I think pension plans are actually a very, very good avenue because there are those sensitive points that James just pointed out earlier about reputation, about presenting their executives as doing harm to the good standing of the Maple 8, right? Maple is this nice soothing image now.
Sweet.
Exactly. And that they're not actually answering to the actual mandate of the people or of even finance, that they have gone rogue. Why the heck are Hutchison, who's the OMERS guy, and Taylor, the OTPP guy, why are they off on this path with the Ford government and the Carney government about a war bank? They're to manage a fund. And so I think those are two sensitive points. With pension funds specifically, if we pull those off the table as a source of fund, I think that's huge. if we just promise that Hutchison and Taylor, we're going to go after you, this is going to look bad. If we pull some of those funds off the table and that money out of Toronto, all of a sudden, I think that can have serious effects on just making the war bank less of a viable project. Because again, Carney seems to really be one of the last figures standing and wanting to back this. I think we could have serious effect in Toronto with pension plans specifically, with motivating the activists within those plans, where there's sort of conversations with some OMERS people right now, I can tell you, as well as with some, is it UPP, University Pension? So conversations with those pension plans, I think that can actually be an excellent avenue to agitate, to promise a fight, and to really take Toronto off of the map, and thereby like really start to unravel the like very viability of the plan.
Absolutely, and a couple of challenges, complications for us. I think one, precisely because we have a Ford government that is explicitly interested in coming directly at teachers, right? Like he has something. Paul Calandra, the Minister of Education. These are people who are trying to destroy the public education system, and one of the ways they are doing that is coming at teachers' unions and trying to set up teachers' unions as the bad guys. And I think what that's often meant with the teachers' pension in particular, I think for very real reasons, there's been at times reticence of drawing any negative attention to our pension plan, because the reality is the vast majority of workers don't have, right, this kind of defined benefit pension plan, right? And that is something that education workers fought tooth and nail for, went on illegal strikes for, right, years ago, really fought hard for. And yet Ford will, on one side of his mouth, try and point at something like that and trying to paint teachers and teachers unions as somehow, elitist, when the reality is these are things we have fought for and are trying to fight for our students and their families to have in some way, shape, or form, right? That's what our unions are trying to build, a society where everyone has those. And yet there is a sensitivity to, hey, if we're drawing negative attention to this, is that going to be weaponized against us? And I think that's real. The thing that I think has been remarkable, and it's been exciting for, I think, all of us involved in the campaign to see, is that now that we have passed these motions at local levels and at provincial levels, there's a clear sense that we don't control our pension, and we can fight for it to do the right thing, because we don't want those funds to be weaponized against us or our students. It was a very clear call from the General Union of Palestinian Teachers in I think October 18th, 2023, of we need everybody to do everything they can to end the supply of arms. And between that and the Albanese report, it's so clear that this is not just, right, the hot cargo motion is essential, but also we have a role in getting our pension plans to divest from these as well. That becomes another way to end the flow of weapons to the actors that are going to be using these to commit crimes, right? The Canadian rifles that are being supplied by the UAE and the armored vehicles that are going through the UAE into Sudan. One of the ways that we can try and end that is by trying to hold the weapons manufacturers, the war profiteers, to account. And one of the ways we might be able to do that is through these divestment campaigns. And I'll just lastly, Jessa, when we started this, I think we didn't think it was winnable in some real ways, right? People have been members of our group have been trying to do, we've been flyering at Ontario teacher pension plan meetings since the 90s around Caterpillar and all sorts of investments in apartheid and
for BDS.
For BDS, for climate, and we know how slow this is. So when we started, the tactic was very much, hey, look, let's use this as a place to break the silence within our unions, within our schools. Let's use this as an organizing space. And yet, inspired by the student encampments, inspired by the No Arms in the Arts campaign, the work around Scotiabank, and we now think we can win this. Right? We've had real wins in all of these campaigns. And I think that's something that we are excited about and energized by almost unexpectedly. That there are, while the challenges are big, there's real wins at hand.
That makes me feel good when I know people see these victories and then try to replicate them, or at least believe that what they're doing is possible. I mean, it's why we do the show, right? If we don't get to hear about some of these victories or these battles, we know why we need to do them, but a lot of us just don't know how or where to start. But
it looks, there are battles that have been won, battles that we're in the midst of, and then upcoming ones. So universities are about to start PACB. The PACB is in, what's that, Palestinian academic and cultural boycott of Israel. So it's the academic and cultural
part of BDS.
Version of BDS, yes. I think UBC has already started theirs. I think U of T and some other Toronto schools are about to get them going. And so all of these moving in unison, I think, are pretty key. And there's momentum behind us from Giller, from Scotiabank. OTPP are right in the middle of the fight, and then there are more ahead of us. Some of these will have incredible material effect. PACB would be massive if all of a sudden those ties with Israel started to get broken at universities. It would have a serious material effect. Just thinking about the South African apartheid. And what really caused disruption there, discomfort there, was being cut off from being able to move freely throughout the world. So anyways, this is part of a really, really large BDS campaign, BD campaign, specifically boycott and divest aspects of this, that I think is massive and will have really, really important material effects at whatever pace it moves.
I think you're already seeing the federal government and global governments having to adjust, right? You could argue that in part the war bank is being sold as a necessity because of the work that's being done on the ground, right? They're trying to find ways to go around democracy, our form of democracy, people's democracy. And so it's working. It just means we might have to pivot a few times, as they do, but that's okay. We will also do that. Gentlemen, is there anything that you didn't get to say before we sign off?
I'll try and keep it succinct. Sort of three things that I want to make sure to get to that I didn't get to before. One, we've just launched our own website at OTPPdivest.ca. So we're encouraging anyone and everyone who is upset and horrified at the idea of Ontario teachers financing war and war crimes. That's another way to think about it. When we're invested in these companies, when we're invested in warmongering and war profiteering, we're financing it. We are giving them money to fuel this. So if you're horrified by that, you can go to OTPPdivest.ca. If you're an OTPP member, a pension plan member, you can sign a letter that will go to the pension plan and your union leadership. If you're a member of the public, you are also a co-sponsor of the plan through the Ontario government, so you can make sure to send your own letter as well. So that's one thing we're wanting to plug. Two other things, just I think in this moment, I think for many people with the supposed ceasefire in Gaza that is just being one way to perpetuate the ongoing genocide. I think there's, for many teachers, sort of questioning or despair about what do we do now? And I think one thing that's been another way for us to think about the role of divestment, and Albanese is clear about this in her report, we're not going to get accountability at any moment from our governments. Our governments are not going to, I don't think anytime soon, going to be throwing Trump or Netanyahu in jail. And yet divestment is one way that we can provide some form of accountability for these crimes and these crimes that have been done by our governments and done by our pension plans in our names. I think this is the very least we can do to try and seek some form of accountability. And I think that's a way to think about the ongoing relevance of these campaigns, that the ask from Palestinian teachers in our case that is still there, the demand is still there. And I think this is one way to think about the ongoing relevance. It's a form of accountability. And then lastly, I think one of the big learnings from us, teachers are often rule followers. We like to follow rules. We like to know what the rules are, and it's not necessarily in our nature to be disruptive and to break rules. And that can sometimes be really scary, I think, for not just teachers, but for a lot of people. And I think what's been really instructive for us, we have spent years playing by all of the polite rules of procedure in terms of asking nicely for divestment and sending the letters and going through the processes that are there. I think what's been really energizing for us and effective is the disruptive actions. That is what has increased the level of pressure and cognitive dissonance on pension leaders, on the pension plans themselves. And that's just been such a clarifying thing for many of us who are coming to our labor activism, are coming to our social justice pedagogy through a bunch of different ways. It really has been the disruptive action and trying to make it accessible for people who haven't necessarily taken that kind of disruptive action before, to take that step into a new place that's a little bit scary and a little bit uncomfortable. But it's been, I think, profoundly energizing for us in terms of moving this ball forward. And it has been the thing that has been the most effective.
Well, blueprints of disruption. I'm nodding along with you. I can understand that completely. Every tactic kind of has its value, but I think people are starting to realize that the rules that were made and the avenues that were set for us through a lot of these institutions were so that we were as ineffective as possible. And I think you just kind of need to go through it to know for yourself that that is the truth. And then you can break free, or you can take James's word for it and just join him at the next action, right? Just step right in. But sometimes you got to get him to sign a petition first, right? That's the first step. They take an action, and then we can give them the megaphone and whatever kind of tricks we have up our sleeves to get into some of these meetings where we should be heard but are not being heard. Yes. Thank you, James. So that was a valuable add-on there. So I'm glad you put your hand up. Such a teacher, right? James has put his hand up to speak, I think, throughout the interview. You can't see this, but he's very well behaved despite what he's telling you. So thank you both for coming in and sharing what's working, what might not have worked, who your villains are. Joe Taylor. And I very much appreciate the efforts that you're going through to mobilize wherever you can. Again, yeah, we will share everything that you shared in the show notes so people can learn even more about the pension plan and the war bank and the work that you're doing to change it all. Thank you very much.
So grateful, Jessa, truly for this chance to talk to you and for the podcast. It really is, I think, an important anchor for a lot of us and really vital political and movement education. Grateful.
Thanks, Jessa.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption, If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.